Okay, AP Psych class, welcome to your third and final video for Unit 14. This one is on social relations. It's your final video, right? No more after this. We have concluded the Myers text. There's a lot to cover, so I'm going to go quickly to get it all in 15 minutes. Just bring whatever questions that you have with you to class so that we can discuss them. All right, so an overview of social relations. There's a couple of different topics discussed. The first is prejudice, right? Prejudice is going to be an unjustified attitude towards a group of people and its members. How is that different from stereotypes or discriminations? Well, stereotypes would be an example of prejudice ideas, right? A stereotype being a generalization about a group of people, usually an exaggerated generalization about a group of people that could be negative, right? And be incorporated into the concept of prejudice. Discrimination is an action against another individual. And we have to understand that while prejudice may mean that there's a predisposition towards discriminatory acts, it does not necessarily mean that an individual is going to discriminate just because they hold these negative attitudes. And on the flip side, when we get in, think about conformity and de-individuation and groupthink, there are individuals that commit discriminatory acts that have no prejudice feelings to back up the actions. They just, got swept up in the group mentality. And so that's something to keep in mind. Where does prejudice come from? Two categories. We can talk about socially constructed prejudice. We could talk about cognitive or thought constructed prejudice. Social roots would lie in the fact that inequalities within the social structure may lead people to have unjustified feelings towards individuals whose status doesn't align with their own. But additionally, we can talk about in versus out groups. An in-group is any group of people that you have a sense of belonging with. An out-group is everyone else. So like at a basketball game, like your fans of your team, that's your in-group, and then the other fans of the other team would be your out-group. That's kind of a simplistic example of in versus out-group. But the mentality, right, that the otherization of people, right, us versus them mentality is the root of a lot of prejudice ideas. Related to in versus out group mentality would be what's known as the scapegoat theory, right? This emotional attachment of blaming a group's problems, right, on another group of people. I mean, it happened in Nazi Germany as one of the catalysts for the Holocaust, but you hear these sorts of prejudice statements all the time, right? Fill in the blank, like things would be better in this country if it weren't for those blah blah blah. It's like pick a group, any racial, ethnic, or religious minority, and you've probably heard a prejudice statement like that, where current social problems are being blamed on a minority group. Okay, cognitively, thought-wise, there are some reasons that support why prejudice thoughts exist. The other race effect, that we have a tendency to identify with people of our own race. It's present, in early infancy, and we also have this habit of being able to recall faces of people who are a part of your own race. And so maybe there's just this, cognitive preference towards, your race versus other races. That can also play a role, especially when we think about vivid cases, right? Concerning our memory, vivid cases are readily available. So the cases that get the most publicity in the media are the ones that you instantly think about. Obviously, one of the current ones that stands out in mind is the association of Islam with terrorism. While not all terrorist acts are committed by people of the Muslim faith, and certainly not all people that are Muslim are terrorists, because those are the only cases you tend to hear about in the media. Those are the ones that stick in people's thoughts and can lead to prejudice or negative attitudes towards that religious group. Additionally, the just world phenomenon is going to be this belief that people have that the world is some fair, predictable place to live in, which I guess personally I think is laughable, but it is, right? That the world is fair and just and predictable, and so as a result of that, people will often use that as justification, right? That they'll say, oh, well, bad things happen to minority groups or bad things happen to certain groups of people because they quote unquote deserve it. Hindsight bias probably also is playing a role in the just world phenomenon, right? And backwards looking reasons, right? Like, oh, well, they should have seen that coming, or they didn't react, so clearly they were expecting that to happen to them. You see a lot of rationalization on the part of people trying to make everything fit their little cookie cutter view of the world. Okay, so that's prejudice as a topic. One of the other topics mentioned was the case of aggression. There's not a whole lot of new things to talk about here. We talked about aggression a lot in the unit on learning and social learning theory. But just to review, there is biological support for aggression, right? Think, limbic system, amygdala, right? We know that electrical stimulation of specific parts of the limbic system can make people aggressive. So perhaps overstimulation in those areas are what leads certain people to be more aggressive in their relations than others. We also know that there's something known as the frustration. We're still on biology. Hormones can make people, change their behavior. Illicit substances like alcohol and drugs can alter people's level of aggression as well. Okay, now on to psychological and social factors. We know that ostracizing somebody from a group can cause aggression. We know from Albert Bandura's research on social learning theory that modeling can lead to aggression. A cool theory known as the frustration and aggression theory exists, that frustration and anger can lead to aggression. And so it shouldn't surprise you that in times of, economic problems or economic downturns, you see a rise in hate group enrollment as a result of the more frustrating life circumstances are, the more aggressive people tend to get. I really love the study that Myers quotes concerning the baseball statistics, probably just because I love baseball, where they looked at all the different thousands of hit, when batters are hit by pitches, and looked and, sure enough, if the pitcher had been rattled, like you hit a home run your last at bat against that pitcher, they are more likely to hit you with a pitch as a result of frustration aggression theory. And so remember, the moral of all of that review from Unit 6 was that the catharsis hypothesis is false, right? That blowing off steam does not make us feel better. It actually just makes us more aggressive. So despite video game creators trying to tell you that it's okay and that you're just letting off steam, social learning theorists will say not true. It makes you more aggressive. The more roles you assume that are aggressive, the more likely you are to be aggressive. Okay, 3 more topics and then we're done. Attraction. What makes people like other people? Well, first, know the mere exposure effect, or sometimes referred to as proximity effect, that the closer contact you have with a person, the more likely that you are to like them. So repeated exposure increases the liking of them. So familiarity, breeds fondness, not contempt. Obviously, physical attractiveness plays a role as well, right? They've done lots of research in speed dating and blind date experiments that do show that, initial attraction to somebody physically plays a role. What makes somebody attractive? Despite, cultural views of beauty, symmetry is important and average-sized features are important. So no extremes, and having a balanced body and face, like left half and right half being symmetrical. Those seem to be the things that lead to the level of attractiveness in various experiments. Similarity. Look, I guess we're all a tad bit egocentric. We like to be around people whose behavior rewards our own thought process. And so similar views that are validating you, right? So you can all sit together and talk about how right you are about everything. That makes you like people. So we like people who are similar to us. So this concept of opposites attract, probably not so true, psychologically speaking. Concerning romantic love or passionate love, that aroused state of intense absorption in one another is usually only present at the beginning of a loving relationship. If you think about that two-factor model of emotion, right? That this physical arousal, and then you put the cognitive label to it as it's, a result of you like loving this individual, right? Just means that any state like that will initiate or stimulate those feelings. Okay, so people trying to base long-term relationships on physical attractiveness and romantic love alone often find that once the spark is gone, then they're moving on to different individuals. So, to make a relationship be long-term, you have to have compassionate love or deep affection for the individual, right? So the key is an equitable relationship and self-disclosure, like being open and honest with a person and viewing them as your equal is what's going to make romantic love last long-term.